I'm Emily Porter. I'm the Digital Repository Program Manager at the Emory Libraries. And my colleague Brad Watson from our software engineering team is here with us as well. You go to the next slide, please. There we go. So this is kind of a meaty topic, and you may be wondering, what's going on? So to give some overview of kind of our repository environment, or I should say environments, we've been a Samvera adopter for a while now, and we do have 2 Hyrax applications that are backed with Fedora 4. However, we also have a very large amount of information or content that's still in Fedora 3. We ultimately are very interested in getting up to Fedora 6 and also having a Hyrax interface to Fedora 6. So the question is, how do we get there? What does this look like? There are 2 known pathways for upgrading or migrating to Fedora 6. And one is got more steps, as you can see. So that's going from 3 to 4, then 4 to 5, and then 5 to 6. There is also, however, a direct 3 to 6 migration utility that's been released by the Fedora community. So we spent a little time thinking about this and decided the best way to learn about this would be to do a pilot. Can we go to the next slide? So our migration pilot, we made a few decisions right away. And one is that we did want to try that 3 to 6 route. We also wanted to look at Valkyrie and the Valkyrie Fedora 6 adapter, as opposed to looking at active Fedora, in the hopes that this might get us better support within Hyrax more quickly. So to do this, we're basically doing an extract and load process through those migration utilities. This also converts our data into OCFL, which is the Oxford Common File System layout, which we're very interested in working with. And then we really have a lot of question marks about what kind of transformations do we have to do to this data so that it can be interacted with through Samvera gems. And so really the kind of end goal of this pilot, which is not a very long-term effort, unfortunately, we have limited time to work on this right now, but we want to see if we can get at least read capability, not necessarily full-blown support within a Hyrax interface. And then we also really want to do some assessment of how much work is this going to be, kind of what level of support is there in Samvera gems right now? How much work do we need to do locally? What else is involved for community work for others who might be interested in moving to Fedora 6? Next slide, please. So I'll go back in time here a little bit. Many of you maybe remember what Fedora 3 looks like. Maybe you've never even seen it. But back in the day, Fedora 3 objects are essentially a series of files. So the metadata itself is typically stored in XML files. And then we have the content file as well. So these are called data streams, but they are essentially binary files. So the kind of common metadata schema across any Fedora object will be DC, which is a Dublin core file that has kind of minimal description in it, and also this relsx file, which is a Fedora managed file that contains information, kind of like PCDM in a way, more of a structural entity. And then we also have richer descriptive metadata stored in a mods XML file. And then we have preservation metadata, which is essentially a premise metadata file stored in this provenance metadata data stream. And then you can also see the object identifier toward the top of the screen, and that's an ARC value prefixed with Emory. Next slide, please. So the first thing we wanted to do was just kind of take a small set of data, run it through the migration process, and see what we got on the other side of that. So we set up a brand new Fedora 6 instance, and we kind of researched the migration utilities. again, we identified a very small set. I think it was 10 or 12 objects. We ran the migration utility on those selected IDs. This is also a nice benefit of the migration tool. If you want to do a pilot like this, you don't have to migrate your entire repository. You can just feed in a set of IDs that you want to work with. We did find that we had to restart and reindex Fedora 6 to make that new data visible. And then we could see that the objects migrated into a flat structure at the root of the Fedora 6 instance. And I'll show you what that looks like in a minute. And each of those data streams that I just showed came across attached as direct children for each of those work objects, essentially. And then we saw that, there was kind of very minimal RDF property that was auto-populated for each object. And that was basically all the RDF that was defined in that rels-x XML file. So basically Fedora's managed metadata. And then we also played around with the Fedora migration validator tool. We're still getting a handle on that to see what the best options are for us there. And so this is our first pass of a migration, but we're also planning to do at least one more run of this during our pilot. So we'll probably do something closer to 100 objects next time. Next slide, please. So here is what the data looked like when we ran it just directly through that migration utility. And so what we see, we have 12 children up at the root of Fedora. Each of those Fedora 3 PIDs came right over as the Fedora 6 identifiers. Next slide, please. And then if we drill down into one of these objects, and again, so this, for those of you who've seen or worked with Fedora 4, this looks pretty similar. But each of those files that I was showing you earlier came across as direct children of that parent object. So they're one-to-one with, we have that PID ID /DC, PID ID /content, etc. And this work level object is stored as a Fedora basic container, but each of those children are being migrated over as binary containers. So we can see some minimal RDF properties here, but obviously we're not seeing anything that looks like PCDM. We're not seeing anything that looks like Hyrax. And we're also not seeing all of our richer descriptive metadata that's contained in those files. Next slide. And so now I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Brad, who's going to talk about the prototyping that we've done to work with that data.
Hello, all. As far as the work is concerned, it moved pretty fast. We started off with some test objects that were uploaded manually before we had a migration, which I went ahead and started to work with as far as the bare bones Rails application using Valkyrie, was concerned. Then we moved on to the migrated data and worked up how to bring in that metadata that Emily just went ahead and spoke of. We are currently working to basically push past to 3. We are almost basically wrapped up with version 1 and 2. But I will go ahead and get you to that point here with the slides. One of the things that we had to do to go and get Valkyrie to work with our bare bones Rails app was to get the objects in as a Ruby object instead of just plain hashes. And I would like to thank Trey Pendragon for basically pointing to, as well as helping me get to that point, which is basically this code inside of Valkyrie.rb as initializer. Basically treats everything as a Valkyrie object that comes in, and Valkyrie object is basically something that we created on the fly while he was looking over my code. There is a link to the original Valkyrie co-location of this. So if you do want to go ahead and explore that and see how things had changed, you can definitely explore that there after the presentation. And yeah, this is a screenshot, but you will definitely see the live presentation here soon. Just a comment here. I asked in Slack basically how snazzy the site should look. Should I go for just a plain bootstrap type of approach? And I think Emily did say just slightly better than GeoCities, and I took her seriously. This is somewhat of the look, and I will get you to that next point here. But this is a working instance of Valkyrie reading the values out and also being able to show the predicate and the value. And this is, one piece of a migrated object in this situation. Before we did have RDF metadata attached. Let's go ahead and move on. And just a precursor, this is kind of my outline for the demo, which I'll be switching into just momentarily. You can refer back to this to go ahead and follow along with the video. I'm just wondering, where we're at that point. I will circle back to the work in progress, but let me escape out of the portion here and show you the live page. So yeah, as you can see, some of these elements are requested. The unicorn is not my idea. But it was appreciated by a lot of people, and counters as well as icons and MIDI, which I will not play here. But I will go ahead and detail how we are able to pull the label information from the migrated Valkyrie objects as the full list comes in. So we are able to go ahead and get title, or as it's marked in our Open Emory test data as label. And if you will see too that we have since been able to add in metadata from both DC as well as mods, which is the desk metadata object. So we're able to go ahead and pull it in, persist it to the actual Fedora 6 objects. So Valkyrie is definitely helping us with that as well. And in this situation, we are also providing links which are kind of formed dynamically to download the anything attached to the objects, children there. Basically, I can show you the process of how this can happen. Right now, this object only has DC metadata already applied. If we just go ahead and click this, it will go ahead and provide more, which includes the mods as well as a couple of fields that were missing from DC present in mods that we can go ahead and therefore display here. Over here is the processing, and one of the big questions was how much work do we have to do to actually get this going? And I don't have too large of a records controller, and most of the processing is located right here. So not much work at all. Playing around with Valkyrie to go ahead and get the things we need. But this does go ahead and lead on to our next bit of work, which is to attempt to take anything that's considered to be content value from an object like this. In our case, it would be the bin files, content, the province metadata, as well as, I believe, some symplectic license, I think, as well as the audit portion, and go ahead and pluck those out of each object in much the same way that we do with the button here, and save them as a file set type of object to the root level of our Fedora instance. So going back to home, it should show up in the list here. And I have been playing around with that, but so far I have run into issues with Valkyrie storage adapters interplay. I've noticed that since I'm using Rails 7 and Ruby 3, that there seems to be a requirement missing in one of the Valkyrie's core functions, the storage function pages. I've had to patch that. And I've also had to deal with certain situations where Valkyrie actually does persist the object into the main list, but reports back that it was not successful in the process. So I had to overcome those steps here. Let me get back to the presentation. And pardon me. Move on here. And I will mute, and you're taking back over. Emily, is that correct?
Yes. Cool. So that's kind of where we are right now. We were wondering what on earth we'd be presenting about, but that's where we are. And so kind of what's next for us? Well, again, once we get through, we've got maybe a couple more months to work on this. Once we come to the end of our project timeline, we want to do an overall assessment. So how well did the data migrate? And really think about how much work do we have ahead for a full migration and Hyrax support? And is that direct 3 to 6 strategy the best approach for us? So far, so good. We also want to write up a lot of documentation about what kind of data remediation needs we need moving forward. We want to document all the infrastructure and architecture for this environment so that we can rebuild it in the future. And also, we'd love to share lessons learned from other Fedora 6 adopters if folks are interested. And sadly, we will have to sunset this gorgeous prototype that we built. We're trying not to get too attached to it, but at the end of the day, we don't want to get too invested in it because we're going to have to recreate all this in the future. But I also want to say, if you're also interested in working with Fedora 6, we'd love to hear from you and would love to connect with you. And that's it for us. If Brad, can you move to the next slide? Yeah, so we just want to say thank you. Here is our contact information and Samvera Slack. I want to thank the Emory Migrationeer team, our scholarly communications team, who are the content stewards for the data that we migrated. Thank you to Trey Pendragon for helping us. And also thank you, Aaron and Griffith and the Fedora 6 community for all the great work they've been doing.